Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow feathers in arms, welcome back to the Rabbit Holes That Quack, episode number 10. You're mostly related to today's documentary, Class Action Park podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandan Jones, and joining me downstream on this adventure, the woman, the myth, a quack who won't stay in the circle, Miss Nicole Matthews.
Hello, listeners.
And if you're just joining us well into our post-apocalyptic future or in near real time, welcome. This is a podcast where Nicole and I subject ourselves to a random documentary each week and let that be the springboard for a larger conversation about the issues therein. If you'd like to drop a particular documentary into the hat for us to choose from, we'll be choosing them from amongst our patrons at patreon.com/Pandora's Quack, where you can also submit broader topics, comments, and questions for both this and our other sister podcasts, such as The Conversations That Quack, where co-host Efrain Garcia and I do a weekly deep dive into the issues facing the Black movie protagonist. But if joining Patreon is not in the cards for you right now, that is more than okay. Feel free to share, rate, and review us on the free podcasting service of your choice and or YouTube, and stick around for our other upcoming shows. And so, without further ado, these are the rabbit holes that quack. Tonight's featured documentary is Class Action Park. Class Action Park is a documentary that focuses on a dangerously legendary water park and its slew of injuries and crimes along with child safety concerns. It was directed by Seth Porges, for which this is his first documentary, and by Chris Charles Scott III, whose documentary credits include this and What About Waco. It was written by Chris, whose writing credits include work on a TV show called Shape of Shreveport, and also sharing co-writing credit is Seth himself as well, whose writing credits include a co-writing credit on a short documentary called The Most Insane Amusement Park Ever, likely what this documentary is based on. And as of this recording, Class Action Park currently sits at a 96% critical Rotten Tomatoes rating with an 81% audience score. So, listeners, last week, Nicole and I joined the fray and said our piece about Britney Spears, the conservatorship, and the music industry at large. So if you missed that, go back to episode 9, check that out. But this week, we'll be jumping head first into the deep end by discussing one theme park in particular that apparently was known to send people home with injuries of all kinds. Nicole, would you consider yourself a theme park person?
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, I definitely was growing up. We had Kings Island in Cincinnati, and then, of course, Six Flags when I was in Georgia. I think when I lived in Chicago, we were all about the local arcades then. But yeah, I remember we would drive out to Six Flags and sort of get there first thing in the morning, go over to the Gotham City themed part, ride those rides first, then head over to whatever the new thing was, ride that, and then just kind of systematically make our way through the park until we'd ridden everything and then do that mad scramble everyone does at the end of the day to ride as many things as you could while the lines are basically empty, kind of jumping in the front, just pretty much running right back to the front and begging them to run it one more time. Did you guys have a local theme park out where you were in California, or did you ever visit kind of a smaller, non-commercial theme park? Like Kings Island, as I said, was kind of the thing that was out in Cincinnati, but like State Fair with like rides, Carnival, that kind of scale.
Yeah, we had a few different places growing up that I remember. One of them, I think, to be honest, I'm not sure of the exact ownership, but I feel like because it was called Great America, and then I think now it is a Six Flags. Could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it eventually became a Six Flags. And then we actually had a water park as well called Raging Waters that was very popular. It's not still around, sadly, but that was a very popular summer spot. So you're kind of depending on the weather, you would do roller coasters versus water park.
Nice. Yeah, outside of Kings Island, I remember going up to Wisconsin one year. I think it was like the Wisconsin Dells. I think it's like the area where they had like my one and only, maybe I've done it a couple times since, but the I think they're called the duck rides. Those like buses that basically have the boat on the bottom, and they just kind of like drive you through some like woods and show you some sights, and then just all of a sudden drive down this hill into water, which is pretty interesting.
I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. It's wild, like when you're a kid and you've like never seen technology like that. You're just like, what's going on? I guess we're just like, this is the end here, and then you just kind of casually get into the water, and then like motor goes silent, and then it like kicks on to whatever the other motor is, and then it goes. Very different than I think I saw a Reddit post the other day that was like redneck engineering, and someone had like put like boat, for lack of a better description, basically boat tires on like a pickup truck, and then they were just like basically driving it at like 90 miles per hour over the water, which is pretty interesting.
I do feel like every kind of area of the US has like their own unique kind of things when it comes to theme parks,
Yeah.
you know, like 'cause some of it is, you know, like somewhat depending on geographical elements.
Yeah.
Because I also remember too going to a place that was like water slides. It was kind of similar actually to something in this documentary in a way, but water slides kind of built into it was called Shadow Cliffs. It was like built into these cliffs, and then you would go. I think there was like 4 of them. You know, looks like 4 people could go at a time, and you would go just all the way down, and then end up in this lake. It was like always really like murky with like, you know, algae and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was also a popular thing to do in the Bay Area. Also, I think closed as well, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the cousin to Action Park. They would probably find each other on a 23andMe test of some sort.
I was definitely having some flashbacks watching it for sure.
Yeah. And now broadly at this age, do you still have like the desire to go to theme parks, knowing how, I guess you could say safe the commercial ones are, but like, you know, when you do go to some of these, I call them state fairs because I'm mostly thinking of like the stuff that like pops up around Halloween that you might drive upstate for, or like some of those things. Like, I don't really know if there's like another classification of those, because like I know I would like come across those over the years, but I feel like they weren't consistently there. So they were like travel-ish, I guess is kind of how you would do that. But is that do you have the desire to go? And then of course Coney Island I think is probably somewhere in the nice in between, because I feel like that's commercial but like not commercial because it's Coney Island kind of thing. But it definitely has. I would definitely say Coney Island is much more regulated than Action Park.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, like, truthfully, I think to your question, I think that trip that you and I took to Coney Island was probably the last time I remember, like, going hard at rides, if that makes sense. Just because, like, we rode so many rides that day. And, like, even doing kind of like what is it called? Like the Superman ride or whatever it was that we were strapped into. Listeners, we were strapped into something. He made me do this. And we were hoisted very high up in the sky and then just released to basically fly over the boardwalk. That was terrifying. I think, you know, the unfortunate thing about getting older is you do start to make these calculations in a different way. So I think I would say that, like, the spirit that was there as a kid in wanting to do those things still very much lives inside of me. But I do think that, you know, I definitely approach each ride and each ride environment in different ways, right? So like I have great excitement about someday going to Disneyland or Disney World with kids. Like, I think that will be fun, and I'll be down for all of the rides. You know, going back to Coney Island right now and doing the new roller coaster that they're releasing this summer. You know, I don't know to think about that. And I think you start to get a little bit more like some of the freak accidents that happen in the news too at even like reputable parks. You know, I think they start to play into your fears a little bit more too, of just like, is the thrill worth it? And I think that's what's interesting about this documentary is like, it's definitely a specific moment in time, I think, for most people in which you do kind of just have that reckless abandon of like, I don't care, I'm invincible. And I do think that's a harder sell as you get older.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is like everyone has that moment where before this moment, if you got hurt, it was more that you would just be embarrassed and then you wouldn't be able to like participate in something that's coming up in a few weeks or like a few months kind of thing. But like then once you get over the moment, you just think, oh, I don't want to like mess up my knee, because if I mess up my knee, then like that's kind of it. And like for like the rest of my life, I just have to like deal with this knee issue thing. So it's kind of and it obviously comes at everyone, I think, a little bit differently, but I feel like that's one of the staples of getting older, of just being like, yeah, I think, my feet are fine now, and just in case that goes bad.
What about you? Are you game for roller coasters?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I actually think I'm good. Like, I had the fortune of like sort of going, like doing what what you were just talking about, kind of at Coney Island, and then like I've had like great moments where I was able to sort of just go all out sort of in my life, where it was like in high school, kind of went all out with like, a group of friends, and we just kind of, stayed in the equivalent of a Airbnb and basically just went all over Florida and Orlando and Miami and Daytona and sort of everywhere you go. And then, when I was in Scandinavia, I'd almost forgotten completely. And I don't even remember I'd have to like look up what this park was, but it's like kind of like, again, like one of those, like, I think it was supposed to be a chain, but like a chain in the way that Six Flags is a chain, where there's like only like a handful of them. And so same thing. It was just like group of friends just went, did this kind of thing. But like, I was kind of thinking, I was just like, yeah, I used to just really want to go do it. And I feel like when we were in Epcot, actually was probably the last time that I was like, okay, like I don't need to come back here unless I'm coming back with like kids, nieces or nephews kind of thing. Because that particular trip, we were just mostly like, oh, okay, like it was checking off that final box of, all right, what is it like to like drink at one of these theme parks? And then when you like as we were walking around being like, oh, there's a lot of like adults drinking. And it was like, I guess we just never noticed this when we were kids, but it was like every like adult that we just saw was like, had like the telltale cup in their hand of like, oh, that's beer. Like that's how they serve it here. So I feel like I was kind of just like, after I watched this documentary, I was like, yeah, I was like, I'm good. Like I might go on like stuff that like, the stuff you've seen with like Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. But I also just think the problem is I just don't feel like the wait would like make any sense anymore. Like before you're just kind of like, oh, cool, like whatever. But like now you might wait for like 3 hours to ride something for 10 minutes. And like now, as I'm getting older, I'm just like much more cognizant of how much time I'm wasting versus how much time I'm enjoying. So.
Well, that is what's great about like, what is it, like Fast Pass at Disney or whatever. And
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Like I'm definitely, everything I said is in the context of not having to wait.
Yeah.
It's not worth it, to your point.
Yeah.
But I think like I'm down for programs that let you skip the line. And I think we did that a couple of times at Disney,
Yeah.
like we were able to just kind of go right up. It definitely makes it a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable. I do think for kids though, the wait is like a good lesson.
Well, it's also just part of the experience.
It does also build excitement, right? Like as a kid, I don't really remember hating it as much as I do now, because I felt like at the end of it was going to be some experience that at least as a kid was like amazing, right? And that felt longer than to your point, 2 to 3 minutes that it usually was.
Yeah. And so now that our theme park cred, or lack thereof, has been established for our listeners tonight, what did you think of Seth and Chris's documentary? Did this lovely theme park in Vernon, New Jersey just get a bad rap?
Oh man, I mean, so this documentary was really interesting. I don't think I had heard of this park before. I feel like over the years living in New York, it's probably been referenced to me, and I've kind of just done one of those like head nods that you do when you're from California and someone's making an East Coast reference that you don't understand. So like the name sounded familiar, but like the lore of it was definitely not something that I was aware of. But I will say, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of rides, I would say, that brought back some experiences that I had growing up. The park I mentioned, Raging Waters, definitely had a wave pool that, I remember thinking was dangerous, and I knew how to swim. And then even just some of like the raft rides, like they had very similar rides where that would happen, where you would just like it was understood when you went on it that like you all were going to pile up on each other. And like that was just like part of it. So it kind of made me start to wonder like how safe the water parks I went to growing up actually were as well. Cause I think a lot of those, also opened in the early 80s. But I found this documentary in sort of like the tension point between what was going on. I think, as someone put it, the horror and the magic. Really fascinating. I think that, as they also said, like, this park is something that, like, never could exist in today's world. We've just become so much more cautious, I think, like, in the way that we raise our children. We're very, like, sue happy as well. So I think that's another thing. Like, legally, things have just changed. And so this clearly was a moment in time, and I am grateful to have, I guess, had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about it, because I do find it really fascinating that this existed, and that kids were able to sort of have these experiences collectively of feeling like they owned this park. And I think, like, someone kind of put it like, oh, they were, basically living in an 80s movie, or it was like an 80s movie, but it was their life, right? And I think this documentary really did kind of evoke that for you, of just sort of like, at least for me, it did remind me of a lot of 80 movies I've seen, and this concept of sort of just like latchkey kids that can sort of do whatever they want. And that definitely was not the upbringing I had. So I think having this be kind of so close in age, just like the generation or just a few years before me, was pretty cool. So it was an interesting one.
Yeah, most of the people that were interviewing, it was pretty funny when they kind of look back on it, because I feel like they all had that same conclusion where they were just like, I don't know how they were able to get away with this for so long, but they also wouldn't change a single thing about it. It was kind of one of those things where just like it had this like transcendent kind of experience where everyone was just like, everything that was going on was absurd. Even this sort of the woman who was telling the story about what happened with like the in the motor world, I guess, part of it, where the kid had lit some of the tennis balls on fire and basically was like firing fireballs and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that wasn't even really like a big story. It just kind of like, and it wasn't even shocking. You just kind of were like, yeah, that sounds like something that would happen there. Like, because by the time you kind of get to that point in the documentary, you're just like, yeah, that perfectly like seems to, fit the bill of what was going on behind the walls here. But one of the things I do think is amusing, and it's not necessarily portrayed often on film, like I think Adventureland, the one with Kristen Stewart, I think kind of does, likely because truth would be stranger than fiction, is that almost no matter where you go, maybe with the exception of state fairs, these places are definitely always in the care of children, which is like amusing when they had that like whole segment about like people were like 15 years old or like 16 or 14 and kind of like barely able to do whatever. And it's kind of a scary thought, truthfully, because you kind of presume maintenance, of course, is done by adults, but like the amount of kids who are just like supposed to be checking seatbelts and then pushing the go button is sort of unsettling when you think about it for too long. But it was like funny how they were just like, they were basically just were employing all of these kids, and then how many people were showing up like just hung over, and then were basically lifeguards or attempting to, they're probably supposed to count to like X number before they let people go down the tube, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, just go. So it's just interesting that that's something that's, I mean, it's not uncommon because there's a bunch of kids in like, the front of every register and like every industry ever, but you would think that there might be some standards for theme parks, but that doesn't seem to be the case ever.
Well, and I do just think, like, in this particular case, like, to your point, it's like some of the, even like the younger people just standing there saying, go, go, go. Like, I remember having those experiences too, where it was like, okay, are they really like watching? Because it seems like their job is literally just to like count 5 seconds and then like push you down this thing. I think what's so crazy about, Class Action Park, as we'll call it, is just that this was happening at such a large scale, right? Like, it wasn't just the people working there. It was also the fact that like they had the Cannonball Loop or, these rides that just clearly were not safe, had not been thought through. And I think that, again, it did make me reflect on my own experiences, just because I can't remember what the one was called, the slide they had that just sort of dropped down. But I remember actually growing up when Raging Waters introduced that as like a new slide, right? Like they were like upping the ante of like, we're going to make this even scarier. And it did make me think now, like, was that really safe? Probably not, and just different things that would kind of occur. Even like shutdowns for like people having like either, like gone in the pool or like an injury in the pool or something like that. Like I do often remember there would be like, oh, this ride is closed for this period of time. So I think there are those smaller examples of it, but I think just, again, the sheer scale of how much this was happening at this place it's truly mind-blowing. It's hard to conceive of in today's world that something like this could even exist.
Yeah, I think this is just almost a product of there being no such thing as the internet. And kind of just like, when they were talking about that world and sort of that era of time when you did just kind of disappear into the world and no one had any idea where you were and that was okay kind of thing, sort of like the latchkey kid aspect that you were talking about before. Because it's kind of wild thought to have like nowadays and I understand how parents nowadays, like they would probably have panic attacks if they just like woke up one morning and their kids had just disappeared out into the world and, out of contact completely all day and then reemerge at some point for dinner or after dinner. But that's just kind of what the summertime was back then. Even I just remember have fond summers being like in Chicago and sort of in Atlanta. And even when we started driving, just people just kind of like, not really telling anyone where you were going. And cell phones hadn't quite, I'll say, become personal yet. Because my dad, for his job, I remember he had like sort of the car phone, sort of the cell phone. But it was like a crazy amount of money, I think, that was like subsidized by jobs at that point. But then to go to a place like this theme park, it seems fun, but the amount of injuries that I guess people survive, as a few of the people, being interviewed said, I guess was just sort of like this weird badge of honor. And it was also funny how they talked about how the park like stood for a certain element of people, kind of what you're talking about, just like this like collection of people who just showed up, who like didn't care for the rules to begin with, and they just kind of ended up there, almost like the park was calling to their souls. But yeah, it's interesting because they're, even like, we were talking about this before the podcast a little bit, listeners, but like the way that there's all this flooding in New York, this flooding was happening during this era, it kind of would like, it's not that it would be unbelievable. I just don't think people would really even be having a discussion about it, regardless of whether what happens with it. And I think that's why this park was allowed to sort of like happen, because you kind of just have this weird legendary word of mouth kind of going on, but it's not like someone's recording this and then immediately like uploading it and being like, hey, does anyone else think that this is dangerous? And then like some engineer in like Arizona is like, yeah, you can't do that. And then someone in like New York and someone. And so I get how this is sort of allowed to sort of just be. But I am sort of like fascinated by, because they were saying there was a lot of injuries that they just didn't report because they weren't serious injuries. And that was kind of, I guess, just the way it was back then.
Yeah, I think, this documentary, I think, took me a little bit on a slight, like, emotional roller coaster from the standpoint that, like, I think the story of Gene is interesting, as the founder of Action Park. And I think definitely a character, right? Obviously, coming up with some of these schemes. And I think, for a large part of the documentary, I actually found myself kind of laughing and like feeling bad about that, right? Because like they were talking about really serious things, but at the same time, like it is kind of funny, right? Like some of the experiences that were happening and just like sort of the kind of like nonchalance which they all sort of reflected on that period, I think. But I think then, sort of, and this is, I think, what the second part of the documentary gets more into, I think when you start to really see and fully understand the ramifications of, people not just getting injured, but losing their lives, it starts to really paint this different picture, right? And I think they did a good job of evoking kind of exactly what the guy said, of like, they're kind of torn in between, this being a badge of honor and then thinking, no, this is like really, really fucked up that this is something that happened to them. And I feel like that's the exact journey the documentary took you on too. And that was tough, like I kind of felt bad at the end for laughing at some of the lighter elements of it. But again, I think because of the scale, it is kind of funny that this was, again, like that people could just go there and just get injured and that everyone knew that, and like, I think the moments that I'm talking about that kind of, again, made me giggle and then I felt bad about that. But just like even the fact that it was so serious that like in the wave pool, they named it like the death section and that they would put new lifeguards in the death chair as like a, rite of passage. It's just so odd how normalized death clearly did become, right? And I think that is sort of fascinating.
Yeah, I almost liken that to just the, because I mean, I don't know how active you were, or how like California culture was, but like, you know, down in like Atlanta and sort of even, yeah, a little bit in Chicago, we would just like venture off into the woods and you would just no direction. And again, like listeners, you guys remember, listeners who were kind of born in the 80s or like before, like it's like you would just disappear with like a general sense of direction of like where home was or where the highway was or where the car was, and it just kind of like didn't matter, and you very easily could just disappear or like stumble down a hill or rock, or you know, and just like break your leg or just, you know, be never seen again kind of thing. And that just kind of just was what happened. So it's like the way that they're looking back on it, it is funny because they do, because I kind of was like thinking about that like in the context of what I just was just talking about, where it's like, yeah, the amount of times that we played street hockey, the amount of times that like we would literally go down 45-degree hills on skateboards racing each other, and then like the times where like you'd hit a pebble and like I just tumbled and tumbled and tumbled and tumbled and had like a I remember my mom being like, you know, scared that I was gonna have the scar that was gonna be on my cheek, but it went away, and just like all these things, and you kind of just get up and do it again. And I feel like at the age that most of the people who are going to this park, it's kind of just like, yeah, you could definitely get hurt. I think the issue was kind of like, you know, what you were saying before, like the horror and the magic is I think there's always supposed to be, and I think one of the guys says this, the guy with the red hair, I think said this. He's like, there's always supposed to be just the illusion that you could get hurt. And I think that's why you kind of keep doing it and you keep doing it and you keep doing it. And I think there's probably the people who went, you knew that like there are sort of these, you know, he talked about walking barefoot in like the asphalt, and like you see if you didn't have shoes or sort of, you know, maybe someone jumping from above you onto you. It almost seemed like the park was kind of run on common sense as opposed to like preventative measures. And like now, of course, you would err always on the side of preventative, or else you might be sued into oblivion in the year 2021. But like 30, 40 years ago, it was kind of just like, well, why were you standing there? Or like, well, why didn't you slow down kind of thing? And I think that's kind of like, it's like not excusing it, but it's like, yeah, I can understand why like this park existed in this moment of time and probably couldn't have happened before and couldn't have happened after. But it's just it's just like the whole thing is just sort of this like mess of circumstantial things that came together in order for it to exist and to exist for as long as it did, because it sounded like it was around for quite some time actually before it finally kind of fizzled out. And I guess as the guy said, people kind of got wise that it was like, oh, hey, like if you go there, it's not just that you'll have fun. It's like you also are starting to get like towards a 50-50 chance that you might actually come back with like a permanent injury of some sort.
But see, that's why I disagree with you. Like, I don't think it was about, like, let's run this on common sense. I think he was sort of glorifying and marketing death to his advantage, right? And I think, like to me, one of, like, the greatest examples of that is the story about what would happen to kids after they got injured, right? Taking them into this shack, you stand in a circle. I think they said they would spray them down with some combination of alcohol and iodine,
yeah,
and that, you know, you would get a prize if you didn't jump out of the circle. Like that to me is totally gamifying like pain,
yeah,
right? And so I feel like to me that's a tough argument to make that it's common sense. I think he knew what he was doing. I think it tapped into something that's really natural to feel at that point in your life, which is that you are invincible. And so what do you want to do when you think or feel invincible? You want to test the limits of it, right? I think that's how you can get that like bigger high of invincibility, is kind of pushing those boundaries. And so I think, you know, what we will never know, and they only, I think, scratch the surface of this, is, you know, how much of that was calculated from the very beginning in his mind. But I think you can definitely see through a lot of the stories and, you know, anecdotes about him, I do think he was aware and sort of actively playing into, you know, that time in a young person's life of kind of wanting to test the limits and knowing that this would be something that young people would sort of rally around, right? And I thought, like, even another example that kind of made me laugh, but was even like the cliff that you just jump off of, and they were like, everyone would watch you, you know, so you would get sort of taunted. And I thought that was funny because I thought it was very uniquely Jersey.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it was another thing that was clearly very strategic, right? Like it's really smart that they would structure it so that everyone could watch that experience, because it just meant that it would be so much more hyped up at the moment of doing it. And even, like with the girls' tops falling off, like, all of it just sort of falls into place after that, right? Like the experience and the environment it creates. So I actually do think he was very clever and calculated in that way.
I almost think that's what it became for sure. But I would almost argue that I don't think that's how it all began, because like even when they were talking about those two rides and how they sort of were designed, the one where it was like the loop sort of situation, and like he was given something that was actually like, engineeringly sound, and then he kind of changed it and had them tweak it when they sort of built it, and then of course like had his employees go down it in order for them to sort of see whether or not they sort of would survive it. Like that to me is more like him just being like, oh, I don't think that'd be fun, I think it should be this way. And then I think after seeing sort of the injuries and kind of all that stuff, I think it's one of those where like he kind of was like, oh, well, that's your fault for getting injured. And then I think by the end, or maybe to like, towards the middle, towards the end, I think he definitely adopted what you're talking about, where he's like, well, I'm just going to push this because now that's what we're known for, kind of thing. And it's like, we almost have to be this counter Disney aspect, which means there has to be an angle of danger. Because even that second ride where it was like, you were supposed to basically go down and get airborne and then kind of be caught, there is like quote unquote physics to that makes sense. But as again, like one of the people that they were interviewing was just like, yeah, but if you were too small, you wouldn't this, and if you were way too much, you were this. And then of course when they tested it, the kid who just basically just went too fast or too whatever and just missed the entire thing, and then ended up getting hurt and sort of I don't know if they said he got airlifted or not, but he basically got boarded out. That's when they sort of shut it down. So I think it's almost one of those things where it was kind of like, in his mind, it wasn't about can 10 out of 10 kids go down this safely. It probably was something ridiculous like, can anyone go down this safely? Okay, then it's fine. And I think I don't think that's where he started from, because it seemed like, after the ski resort thing, he was like, oh, let me just do this like little theme park thing on the side and like, we'll see what happens. But I agree with you. That's where it got to, because even when they were talking about the legal stuff, when they were really getting into the, he just refused to pay anything sort of thing. That's when I think he was just fully gone at that point. It didn't really matter.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there were definitely points, though, where they talked about his vision, like, from the beginning. Like, to me, it's like they started by thinking they were going to put someone in a metal ball and roll it down a hill.
Which they do now with plastic balls.
That's
They do now
point.
with plastic balls, yeah. Because that's what they do. Those inflatable, like, inflatable gerbil things. But you would imagine you might want to try it with the... and actually, that would have worked had the guy said they not used PVC pipe. That might have actually worked.
I don't know. I feel like I don't know what would be keeping that ball on the tracks, regardless of what the tracks were made of.
Yeah. I thought it was that the tracks got too hot, and that's what kept it from doing. But you obviously that metal ball.
No,
is probably...
it was definitely both. I think what they said when they were talking about it, they were like, first of all, there's nothing keeping it on the track.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, the day they tested it, it expanded with the sun, which I think made it even worse.
Yeah.
It made it fall apart, I think is what they said.
Yeah.
That visual to me is just like, and the guy going across the highway.
Yeah. Well, that's just like, again, like and it is funny because it's just like when you think like it almost, that's what I was saying. It's almost like the truth is stranger than fiction with this, because you can make a fictionalized movie called Action Park and it would literally come off as the tone of like a Chevy Chase movie, because you would just be like, there's no way any of this is true. And it's like they could probably go back for, all those years, just almost like how they did for the documentary, and find people who were like, yeah, I mean, like, that's just how it was. And we would throw this party and we would do this and we would do this and people would do this. And it's definitely absurd. But I mean, the movie, this documentary does serve as sort of a perfect cautionary tale as to both why regulation exists, of course, and why money just like makes people sort of look the other way, kind of what I was getting at before. Because the fact that Gene with like zero engineering experience would basically just tweak these rides to make them quote unquote extra fun, and then test them on employees who were then paid to essentially survive the ride is absurd. And I can't even imagine the legalities of that in 2021 of them just like if Six Flags or even like Disney World was like, oh, hey, we made this like cool Star Wars ride and we actually don't know if it works. Hey, you guys who are making minimum wage, like jump on this and just see what happens. And then if you make it to the end, I'll give you $100. Like that's absurd. And it's like, I can't even imagine that park could be open one day after that instance. So it's like one issue. And then from the looking the other way aspect, this is why places like, like Atlanta, anecdotally, to compare it to sort of, when prices started to skyrocket, when I was down there last time, due to just all the filming that's been going on for the last like 10 years. And like, I would presume the cost of living is still much, much lower than where entertainment transplants were coming from, out west or kind of up north. But you can tell that, pre-pandemic exodus, which probably blew up actually during the pandemic. I should actually ask around some friends about that. It just brought a lot of money into the Atlanta area community because you always had all these people kind of going to these local coffee shops and going to these restaurants and all that kind of stuff. And if that were suddenly to just end, I would imagine Atlanta would be very, very almost like irrevocably changed or sort of naked at that. Same thing with LA. Like if for whatever reason there was just a weird way that Hollywood was just able to just dip from LA, I don't know what LA would be at that point. It'd just be kind of a weird sort of soggy suburb. So when you have that town of Vernon that sort of seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, and then it's growing exponentially due to casinos and like that Playboy footprint and like the ski resort and the theme park, you can imagine if all those things just suddenly disappeared, that town might look like a ghost town. Yet at no point did it seem like anyone actually like care about the human capital that was being cost, even to the extent, and like this is probably one of the moments where like I think my eyebrows raised completely, where like the town basically, listeners, was like, you guys have so many injuries, you're basically occupying our ambulances. So we need you to buy your own. So when people do get injured, you can just get them to the hospital yourself. Like when that thought occurs to you, a bunch of things need to get shut down. And like, it was kind of just like, oh, well, like that. Yeah, we'll buy two. And then as the person mentioned, he was like, yeah, we just ended up buying like two ambulances, I think at its peak, which is again, just all further absurdities that were going on.
Well, I think the gentleman in the glasses made a similar point around the deaths, right?
Yeah.
That like it should have been shut down after the first death.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have had instances of like multiple people dying on the same rides. And, I think that's what I meant about the emotional roller coaster, like the gentleman that they focus on, his family at the end, that died. I think it does really put into perspective the seriousness of kind of what was going on there, right? And I think like another thing that kind of stuck with me was, I think the comment again, the gentleman in the glasses made just around like, when they do all, a certain subset of people that grew up in Jersey or New York City at this time, you're out at a bar, you do brag to your friends about this, right? But that when they go to their shrink, it's just about how fucked up they are, right? And I thought that was like a really sobering comment. Because I think that's also like coping mechanisms, right? That's really indicative of like a lot of ways that we handle things in life, right? Like if you can, it becomes a fun story to brag about, but then usually there's some other sort of like trauma or something else that you're dealing with on the other side of it. And I think that is sort of, the important thing to take away from this documentary, right? Is that like, this is something that people will wear as a badge of honor, but then you also don't know, outside of just injuries and death, what sort of lasting effects it's had on these kids, right? And I think, one of the employees had made a comment like, oh, there's stories about Gene that they'll never reveal. That really made me wonder, right? Like, obviously, anytime someone's going to say that, it piques your interest in what that could be. But that kind of said to me that there was probably even a darker side to all of this than even what was being shown in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that just falls under the umbrella of like, well, who's going to stop us kind of thing. And that's kind of where I was saying, like, I think by the time he had reached that point, I think he's fully the character that you're sort of talking about. I feel like when he went into it, it's weird. I almost feel like when he went into it, he reminded me a lot of Singer, I think his name was, the guy from the college admission scandal, where it's like you kind of start off by like, it's not like you're trying to do good. It's just like, I'm just trying to do this job sort of thing. And then you definitely hit a tipping point where you're like, oh, wait, like I can either do this the right way or I can keep going down this like, call it the hustler's way of like cutting corners here, cutting corners here, cutting corners there. And I feel like once Gene kind of got a taste of that, and then sort of the, even that instance where like his, I'll just call him his right-hand man kind of thing. I forgot what his title was, where it was basically like, when we just basically refused to stop paying for things and they would come to the park looking for him. And they finally closed off the box office, and I basically took care of it, quote unquote. They eventually just started coming and knocking on his door, and then he would kind of, and again, he was just very, very vague about like what it took to kind of get those officers to sort of go away. So it just almost kind of became this weird atmosphere where I think it was, a very early minor instance of the, the phrase that became popular here in the United States in 2008, just like the too big to fail kind of thing. I think there was probably just too much in that area and in that community that people were like, well, you can't just remove this mechanism, this giant engine now that's there. But as that woman, who sort of lost her child was kind of just very, very like adamant. Like she just, she's like, he's a terrible person. She's, a stronger language to that. But it was also just like, never once was there, I think, any responsibility taken, neither by him. And I don't remember, you may remember, but like, I don't remember his son, I think, who was the one that they were kind of doing some of the interviews where it was from like a few years prior. I also don't think he was really taking responsibility, but I also don't, it didn't feel like they asked him direct questions about it. He also was just kind of recounting the, like, some of the ways that things have kind of come together and kind of painting a picture of a little bit of like what, Gene's process was. But yeah.
I kind of just assumed that was from like a more positively
something unrelated
filmed like previous footage or something like that. Yeah. But like, I agree with you. I think again, like that's something that to me would have been interesting to kind of hear a little bit more about, because like I believe her when she says that, he never reached out. Right. Yeah. And I think that says a lot about a person's character, especially when like, again, this isn't like a one-off incident. Like this is something that's happening a lot. Right. I think that shows kind of the criminality in it. If I'm being honest, I think if you're running an amusement park and something like that happens as a one-off, you are going to apologize to the family because it's a fluke, right? Like you haven't done something wrong. There's been a tragic accident, right? Or something that you couldn't have anticipated had occurred. But I think the fact that like he didn't reach out just again sort of to me says that like, he didn't care. Like I don't really know what else it could have said.
Well, it's also just one of those things where like it's so absurdly wrong that's why I think it's like, well, what are you supposed to do here? Because it's like, a roller coaster fails now and they do their investigation, and then there's always the like press release or the video or someone just goes, at 3:13 p.m. it appears as though, this event happened and then this event happened and then this event happened, which then caused this event, which then, in a completely fluke, there's no way that this could possibly happen sort of situation, this is what happened, and then everyone sort of apologizes and there's a settlement and everyone kind of moves on and blah, blah, blah. But like in this instance, it's like, what are you supposed to say to like the way that, that family sort of lost the kid that they sort of focused on towards the end? It's like, if there's an investigation, I feel like you just kind of look over that area and you just go, I mean, yeah, you're basically on a skateboard with a questionable brake going who knows how fast. So what are you supposed to do when you almost inevitably will flip over the side of this kind of thing? It's like you would have to like landscape or change this like rubber, bumper, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And I think at that point, it's like you're just sort of like redesigning the ride. And then, America hasn't become, I don't know when it happened, when we became so litigious. I feel like that actually happened, give or take, around the infamous McDonald's coffee incident, where everyone kind of realized that they could kind of sue for everything. But yeah, it's just kind of like, because it's not something that you can kind of fix. It's like you kind of would need to just like redo this, which I think is also kind of part of his attitude of just, I'm just going to keep going because what are you going to do to me? And I think ultimately they kind of still don't do anything. It's kind of just the public that just sort of eventually just stops going at the level that they were going, and then he kind of runs out of money. And then of course his like weird shady friend that he's just able to get money from, who also, I guess you could probably have a whole documentary on whatever that guy was doing and whatever his whole situation was.
Yeah, I thought it was very telling that even Donald Trump did not want to work with Gene.
Yeah, It's pretty classic. You know, when he, you know, and again,
but I think that just says a lot about what we need to know about this.
I mean, some of it is definitely like revisionist history, and like obviously like everyone like loves to hate on him now because it's like he got to the point where he is by doing some things right. So I'm not going to take that away from him type of thing, but it is funny to think about that like you would have someone who seems to be very liberal with the things that they invest in to kind of be like, yeah, this seems problematic. I'm good, man. Like, I think I'm good. Which is really, really absurd.
Well, I mean, look, I definitely think he was a kooky character. I think that, you know, again, the magic of it is, and I think they said this, like, he did envision from the beginning that it would be a place with no rules, right? Like, he intentionally wanted to create that environment. And I think we should also provide a disclaimer to listeners that if you are at all squeamish, you might not want to watch this documentary because of some of the very graphic descriptions of the injuries. But I think, you know, for me, the reason that I am a little bit more down on his character is because of some of the beginning stories. And I think even the like building of the cannonball slide, which I know you mentioned, like to me, when they were talking about them trying to figure out why kids were coming down with lacerations, and the reason being that previous children's teeth had gotten stuck to the top of the ride. Like, he knew that, you know, like they're testing the ride, they're wondering what's going on, they're finding out that reason, and he's still proceeding. That's pretty gnarly.
Well, I mean, when you send a dummy down and the dummy comes through dismembered, I feel like that's a pretty strong, you know.
Yeah, he kept going.
Yeah. He's like, hey, I will pay $100 to any of you that go through. And then it's like, you know, people just go through and kind of survive. I like how they had a trap door in case people did get stuck. So you know, he was kind of...
That was immediately what I was wondering when I saw it. Yeah. Was like, what happens if someone gets stuck up there?
Yeah. But see, again, like, that's like one of those things where it's like, it is physics-based. And that's why I'm laughing, because it's like, I have to assume the loop was there in the version that he was given. And like, now I'm just curious about what he changed that the loop then just became completely untenable kind of thing. Because it's one thing to obviously do like a loop when you're on a roller coaster, because there's like, you know, kind of, it's some of it's momentum, some of it's like motor and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's just, you know, that makes sense. But like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I don't know that a human being with no assist, like bobsled type thing, would cleanly just do that loop. And so like, it was just like a really, like, I just was puzzled the entire time. And that's just, you know, that's just me who plays video games where there are loops in it and you have to like maintain like a very specific speed and you can't tap brake and you can't like accidentally do this or this or this. Like, it's a very like, you have to be paying attention to all the math that kind of goes in order for it to like work perfectly. So it's just funny that he tweaked it a little bit and was like, oh yeah, this is probably fine.
Well, and I mean, you know, like, that's what's interesting about them saying, you know, if you were too big, you couldn't go, and if you were too light, you couldn't go. Yeah. So I think for me, when I saw it, that was kind of what I thought. Like, I'm sure this is possible, but you definitely have to have like the right person that you're sending down it.
Yeah.
And it did remind me too, even of like, more to the point of what you should be doing. Growing up, like when we would go to Raging Waters, there were definitely some rides where I remember weight would be a factor. Like, I think there was like this inner tube ride where like they would make sure, I think that the heavier person was in the back, but they would definitely like make this assessment, if that makes sense. And they would position you kind of according to body weight for safety reasons.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something like, you know, especially when you're talking about water slides, like to your point, you know, roller coasters are different. You're strapped in, you know, it's all automated. But that is sort of also the funny thing about water slides, right? It's like your body is the ride. It all kind of comes down to like, not just your weight, but, you know, they said this too with some of the rides about like knowing when and where to maneuver your body weight. Like, that was something I remember growing up too, of like, if you weren't paying attention, if you weren't kind of like riding the ride in the right way, you could kind of have a bad trip down, right? And so I think that like those are things that these parks do need to be conscious of. And I think that comes obviously with like proper testing, engineering, and execution that clearly was not going on there. But stuff like that, you know, should be almost like rules that are given to people of like, must be this weight, or this is how we recommend riding this ride for the, you know, the best safety.
Yeah, I'd almost be curious to know like what the almost to talk to like a water park engineer, because I feel like there's a lot of things that you would want to try or to do, but you kind of just can't, because it's like the nature of how water flow always has to be sort of interconnected with whatever's going on, and then speed and all this kind of stuff, and then making sure that when people dismount that ride, and kind of the, you know, the joke when he was just like, yeah, no one got off of this one ride without sort of walking funny kind of thing. Because it's like, you know, there's the water aspect of this. There's the stuff, you know, I mentioned before, like the fireball tanks, the snakes that were in the water, the wave pool stuff with like the death end, like that loop ride. I mean, I remember like Lake Lanier in Georgia, for instance, being a place with wild rides. But just like I said in the doc, there were people who couldn't clearly swim, just taking it for granted that like, oh yeah, it'll work out. And then sort of the, that like, you know, the wristband thing with like CFP, I think is what it was on there. And like, I definitely went on a couple of rides at Lake Lanier, and I was just like, yeah, I think I'm not going to push this. Cause it was one of those things where like, I always tell people like, I can swim to like get from point A to point B. Like I'm comfortable with that, but like, just like being dropped into like 10 foot of water and then just sort of like hanging out there for the duration, like that, I can't probably really do for very long. So it's one of those where it's like, this park, this is kind of what I was saying, there's almost like a weird common sense element. There's definitely not the safety net in place that there should be. And that's kind of what regulations do. And that's the part that like by the, you know, after a certain point, Gene just didn't fundamentally care. But there's like also that part where the guy was like the element, the type of person that was attracted sort of to this park, with all the like fights and stuff that were breaking out and all the sort of the stuff and various sort of activities. I did enjoy when he said like the element. And I think the footage was just like this like very, you know, like dark version of Goldie Hawn woman that sort of like was on camera at the time. I definitely laughed out loud at that. But yeah, it's a very, some of the stuff sounded really cool. But again, I was just like, I just don't know. Like, it's funny because this is the like perpetual argument, like, you know, debate that you and I always have, where it's like, I do think what he wanted was cool, but like there was nothing in his ear being like, okay, let's do it, but let's make it so that people can't light, you know, tennis balls on fire and shoot them at each other. Let's make it so that you can't accidentally overdo or undo the speed regulator and have that weird accident where that kid almost got decapitated. Like, let's like do these things the correct way, as opposed to just like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll work itself out.
No, I don't disagree with you. Like, I thought that, and that's what I mean about like even finding it funny. Like, as someone that did grow up like going to water parks, some of this is like stuff that I wish I could have tried for sure.
Yeah.
But I think because I did grow up going to water parks, it also gives me like this inherent understanding of just how dangerous some of the stuff they were doing is. And I think, again, that's sort of the tension of it, right? It's like, it is sort of appealing to that kid in all of us of like, wouldn't it be cool to go down a water slide that's like pitch black and completely dark, you know? But then the reality is like, but you might get hurt. And I even do remember that growing up. Like, I was never severely injured, but I definitely remember, you know, like cuts here and there, or, you know, kind of bad ends to the ride. Like, you know, the part when you would hit the pool having kind of like a bad impact. And then I definitely remember like cousins and things like coming to visit that would like get injured or have things happen. And even with, you know, those wave pools, which I think was just a really popular thing. Like, I remember a lot of places, even growing up, like when my family would go on trips, you would see like wave pool places. But I definitely remember like moments in that where I would like look around and realize like, you know, some of these kids seem like they're having a really tough time right now, right? Like, you can see it in someone's face when like they're not handling the water well. And like, that was a really it experience, I remember. And I remember even times when like that was me. Like, I think like my dad had to pull me out a couple of times. Like, so it does kind of, I guess, you know, beg the question of just like, are water parks inherently dangerous because of the nature of water?
I feel like the issue with water parks is, unlike a traditional park like a Disneyland or Six Flags or something like that, if there's too many people in the park, that's fine. Like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, there's still only finite amount of people that can be in this line, finite amount of people who can be on the ride, a finite amount of people who can be in and around the ride at any given time. What it seemed like with Action Park was like there was just too many people at a certain point, and so even to the point where the guy was like, we had to turn the wave pool off just to sort of take a second to search for bodies. And like, you know, the way that he said that, so matter of factly, like it almost is like you could do a park like that, you know, putting the safety stuff aside, if it just wasn't so like packed. Like if you were able to actually like be in the water, like the one guy was saying, I think he was like not the security guy, I forgot what the one guy was with the glasses with the gray hair. He was like, you know, there would be a spot where you could sort of just chill at the bottom of that place where you could sort of cliff jump, but you also have to be very cognizant that no one's going to just come and like jump over and like also just land on your shoulders kind of thing. And it's like, that's just kind of the nature of, because I remember Lake Lanier, again, kind of in Atlanta, out in Georgia, where it would just be like, I have like vague memories of like being there with a few friends, and it was just shoulder to shoulder, and there's really nowhere to go. And so you would have people just sort of like so packed into these wave pools that, you know, to the guy's point about, you know, it's fresh water, like you're not going to float. So it's kind of like if everything comes up and you just sort of land wrong, kind of the way that people in concerts will like mosh pit or whatever, I can totally imagine how easy it is to just be lost, because it's like, unless someone notices you go down, that's kind of it. Like there's really no way for you to kind of regain your footing and stuff. So it almost feels like that. And again, that's to oversimplify just one of many issues, but I feel like that's almost something that should kind of be paid attention to a little bit more. Cause even I've never been to a public pool. But even I imagine that whenever I've like driven by or like walked by them, especially on these days when it's like 90 degrees, it's like the same thing. It's like shoulder to shoulder. And it's almost like you can't even really swim in it. You're just kind of in it kind of thing. And again, like if you just cramp up, something happens with the knee, you go down and can't really find your way up. Like it just seems like there's just too many people. The motor pool thing is its own thing, but like I feel like that's almost, I'm not going to say that leads to like a lot of the majority of injuries, but I feel like that's something that should also be assessed for stuff like this.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a lot of factors coming together, I think, to create an environment that is very difficult to monitor and sort of have be consistently safe.
Yeah. Because it's also like, what are you really supposed to do? Like, I understand like beaches to a certain degree, because you can kind of like, there's cues of people being like, oh, hey, like if someone, like everyone kind of points, and maybe you'll kind of see someone if they're, you know, being really attentive, which they're really supposed to be, and they kind of be like, oh, that person doesn't look like they're swimming correctly or blah, 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 blah. And they kind of have someone dedicated to just run straight to you and get you out. But like, to the point you just made, how are you even supposed to recognize when there's just a sea of people in like a tiny space kind of thing? I actually do wonder if there are capacity limits. I would assume that there is, the way that there's like, you know, too many people can't be in a bar because of, you know, the fire marshal number that's there. I would assume there is, but I've never noticed or seen anything about how many people can be in a pool.
Oh yeah, there's definitely limits.
Yeah.
It just kind of depends on where you are at, like the pool itself, and then where you're at in the world too.
Yeah. Very true. Anything else from Class Action Park that you can think of for Gene and his decades of shenanigans?
I mean, again, I think that, you know, I think this is definitely one, unless you're squeamish, I would say everyone, you know, will enjoy, just because I do think that that tension is something that lives in all of us, right? I think that, you know, we're all only human, and I think testing the limits, you know, it can be enticing, right? And like that presents itself in our lives in lots of different ways and in, you know, different time periods of our life. But I do think that it's kind of, you know, as we've said, it's fun to envision what it would have been like to have been in an environment like this with so few rules, where kids have sort of taken over and created their dream world. But I think we also have to be realistic about what that actually means in reality, right? And like the implications of that. I think that for these people, it probably will continue to be, you know, a fond memory and something that unites them. But as I said, I'm curious about lasting impacts. And I think we already know what some of those are, again, from an injury and death perspective. But, you know, there is probably like some emotional trauma that these kids carry. And I'm sure just because, again, the nature of how traumatic childhood is in and of itself, right? Like, I think that's something we have to remember as well, is like, this is all of childhood's most traumatic experiences multiplied in some ways, because a lot of kids have stories about like, oh, at summer camp or when we were out on this outing or whatever. So to me, it just sort of magnifies all those types of experiences by putting kids in this environment where there's all this like outdoor activity and it's all different, and there's motor world and there's water world. Like, it's just, to me, it's like the perfect storm for terrible childhood stories and the things that happen to you that you never ever forget, right? And so I'm sure there's a lot of those out there, right? Like, I think someone should maybe do a documentary collecting those stories. It was cool that we did get to hear from some people, that grew up going there. But I would love to hear from the hundreds more out there that probably exist, because I'm sure there's probably more than just physical scars.
Yeah, there's a to that point, there's a documentary series, listeners. I think it's just called the Up series, and I think it's by Michael Apted. But basically, the premise was he wanted to follow X amount of children just throughout their lives to kind of see like what happened to them, kind of thing. So he sees them at 7, he sees them at 14, and then I think he sees them at 21 and 28. Some of them make it kind of all the way to the last version of it. I think it gets to 49, if I'm not mistaken. There might be one more after that. And it's really fascinating when you kind of watch it, especially in kind of close succession with one another, because you kind of see how these kids grew up, and it's kind of just like, I think everyone looks kind of at themselves as kind of having grown in this way or stayed the same or kept this habit or that habit. But it's really fascinating to watch these sort of strangers grow up and to like watch them. I think there's one that kind of like, had a really hard time with like drugs and kind of like fell out of society for a little bit, and I think disappeared one year and they couldn't find him for the documentary, and then sort of came back and like was kind of explaining what happened and all this kind of stuff. So it's really kind of fascinating, just kind of a anthropological sort of just, this is kind of the story of being human. But I would actually, to your point, would like to see something like that starts off not with like a light, to like belittle, but like something like this, kind of to your point, to kind of see, to track back like what kind of befell some of these people. Because when you're hearing all these people in the documentary talk about it, they're very aware of like how dangerous it was and kind of what happened, and they all have people around them that have like varying degrees of everything as small as like a skinned knee to just like broken arms and all that kind of stuff. Like, they were all sort of aware of it. And even sort of that woman at the very end who was basically just like, yeah, it shouldn't happen, this place shouldn't exist, blah blah blah, but like I'm glad it did, like kind of in a very like metal kind of way. So it would be very interesting to kind of see kind of like how that happened. But there are obviously people there who like just went and thought they were going to swim, and then the person did land on their shoulders, or they were the people who got scraped up by the teeth that were inside of a dark inner tube, or as that one guy said, where he was like, you're in this dark inner tube and then all of a sudden you're in the sky, and you just didn't expect to be in the sky, and then all of a sudden you like land in the water. Like, I do imagine there's people who have like long-standing issues kind of because of that. But it would be sort of interesting to kind of figure out how those people are sort of faring, X amount of years and then X amount of years and then X amount of years sort of after it, especially, again, kind of pre-pandemic, when you just watch all of these theme parks all over the world kind of getting new additions, and that's like making news. Like, did these people ever go to a Disney World? Did they ever want to go to a Disney World? Did they ever go to anything like any of these commercial parks as they got older when they had kids? Like the one guy said, where he was like, if I found out my kids were going there, he's like, I'd beat them down, sort of thing. It is interesting to just kind of see like what would happen with these people. And then these people in particular, I'm sure, I think there was just that guy, the one guy who I think it seemed like he had kids. But like, would these people let their kids just sort of like venture off into a park that wasn't Disneyland or a very commercialized sort of situation? So there's definitely a lot of human psychology to sort of track with this. But yeah, I'd be curious, as you said, to kind of see whatever happened to some of these people.
Well, and the other thing I'll say too, to end it, on Gene, and this is probably a deeper conversation for another time, but I do think the other thing that this documentary, it not directly calls out, but I think something that it makes me think, though, is like, we all kind of can accept that something like this could never exist now. And I think we all generally agree that that's for the best. but at the same time, it's interesting to think about what you lose, right? Because of how regulated, how PC, how, just everything in our culture has kind of become, right? And I think like from an innovation standpoint, I sometimes wonder, what that is sort of doing to, just ideas and new concepts and new ways of even entertaining people, right? Like, what sort of limits have we placed on ourselves in the name of safety, that then have sort of, I guess, chipped away at other things that ultimately could be positive, right? And I think like it's for the best that we don't have an environment where someone like Gene could be successful again, or at least you hope, right? But what do you lose out on that, right? And I think like sometimes, to me, what I see is that things become a little bit more sterile. And I think especially when you want to think in the context of, of this particular documentary, what does it mean for childhood, right? Because I think even as you said, you kind of grew up going off into the woods and things like that. I probably was a little bit more sheltered, but still remember a time pre-cell phones, so I think there was that freedom in my childhood. And to your point now, like, it's like everything is filmed, everything is recorded, everything is something that you can say and, kind of get in trouble for. So I think, people should watch this for the nostalgia of it and to sort of reminisce about a time when you could scream obscenities at people in mass and have that be socially acceptable.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Jerseyisms might not even fly in Jersey today, which is would be really interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll close by saying, yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think there's the thing that it makes me think of, and I think about this off and on, whenever I kind of see something that reminds me of it. But when you're like 12, 13 through, we'll call it maybe give or take 17, give or take 18, there's really not anything in the world that's set up for just you. There's like kid stuff that you can do, and then there's kind of this weird gap, and then there's sort of like, okay, now that you can drive, there's still a little bit of a gap, but at least you can go to this restaurant, at least you can take yourself to the mall, at least you can kind of do this. And I always think there's some friends of mine, I used to live in one of those neighborhoods that had like tennis courts, and had like a lot of friends from high school, kind of college, and we created this sort of fictional game. For any of you who've seen the movie Basketball, it's very similar to that. Basically, it was the equivalent of playing ping pong with soccer balls. And we would all gather like every Monday night at the tennis courts, and it was very fast and the furious. Everyone would kind of show up in their cars, and they would just kind of wait, and then I'd roll up there at 10, flip on the power and the lights, everyone got out of their cars, and it was basically like 3 versus 3, and we would just play for like 3 or 4 hours, and then we called it a night. At some point, the people in the neighborhood, I think there was like vandalism that was going on, so naturally you kind of hang that on teenagers because it's who else would it be? And so they called the cops on us. And this cop came up and basically, did what cops actually should do. He watched us play for like 5 or 10 minutes, didn't like come in hot or anything. And then he kind of like walked up and kind of quietly was just like, who's in charge here? I went and I talked to him for like 5 or 10 minutes. And like the sum of that conversation was just like, all right, when do you guys play? And I was like, usually on Monday nights. And he's like, okay, if we ever get a call on Monday nights for this, he's like, we're not coming back here. Have fun, sort of thing. Eventually the neighborhood, they kind of like rally, and they somehow like they chain the gates, and they chain the power and all this kind of stuff, so we can't play. And the first time that happened, there's like 25, 30 of us. So like this is what I said, like we're always supposed to go. So like 5 or 6 people came back to my house, and we played video games. But then like that night, I think like the stories ranged from a few people went like drunk driving, a few people like started and went off-roading, a few people kicked over tombstones, a few people like flipped over like cows and all this stuff. And it's one of those things that stuck with me, because I was like, the issue is not so much that like teenagers are crazy kind of thing. There definitely are some that are crazy, but it's like, where are all of these people with all of this energy and nothing but time and like money to burn? Where are they supposed to go? Like, what are they actually supposed to do? So like when I look at like Action Park, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I was like, if, you know, in my neighborhood, especially when I was in Chicago, it was like all day we were playing street hockey, just all day, all day, all day. And then as soon as it got dark, we were playing Manhunt, we were playing Capture the Flag, we were playing hide and seek, we were doing all these things with like glow sticks and creating games and all this kind of stuff. And that was just kind of how it happened. But like, I don't know now what people do, because it's not, I'm sure there's still people doing those things, but like not at the scale that we were doing it, because that was kind of all that you could do. And like, that's what I kind of like to bring it back around. Like, it's like, I get why Action Park was successful, because that was definitely the age of people, as this guy said, where like you could just be gone all day and no one was looking for you. But now people are kind of proactively checking in, proactively, oh, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? Sort of thing. So I say all that to kind of be like, it would be interesting to see if anyone is trying to solve that problem. I say in a wholesome way, really just to kind of contrast what, you know, ultimately was motivating Gene to kind of do all of this. But it would be interesting to see if someone could figure that out, to kind of be like, okay, we just need a place to go so that these people can kind of hang out and have fun and like not be drinking or not be doing this stuff on premises. It's kind of what the YMCA was supposed to be. And then it kind of became, I'll call it a punchline for a weird sort of cultural zeitgeist joke, but it's interesting to kind of see if anything will ever happen with that.
Well, and the other thing too is like, we just might be so out of touch. Like maybe if it existed, that's not what kids want to do anymore today. You know, like I hear a lot of that too. Just like,
yeah,
well,
it's TikToks nowadays.
Play video games or go on Instagram or do TikTok videos or whatever. And I do think that's a reality. But to your point, that's the thing about innovation, right? Like, and about, is there something that's more family friendly, more kind of give everyone peace of mind, that this is what your kid is spending a couple of hours doing. Yeah. I definitely think there was a gap in the market for that, for sure.
Because even like you and kind of your, I'll call you and your crew, Buffy's, you and your Meet Girls, if there was a place that was almost like how you hear about these like YouTube creator studios, you guys would have been there like all day during the summer, like taking, you know, photos, doing videos, like setting up kind of stuff. Like, and that's what I mean. Like, it's like, I feel like there's something there that is not necessarily being tapped into. Now, granted, would most people, is that too high a production value? And this is when you get into the philosophical and more into like, you know, our day job kind of conversation. But it's like, there is something to the guerrilla nature, of course, of making these TikToks and kind of in the most absurd ways. But if you did have those areas, those places where you could just go, the way that skateboarders kind of just skateboarded everywhere, and then they tried to make skate parks, and then they kind of caught on to a certain degree. Like people were like, oh yeah, this is where I'm supposed to go to do this so that I don't damage the wherever. And then most people started to go to skate parks, and then you just had the people who were like hardcore, the quote unquote, like the metal skaters and all these people who were like, okay, you have to kind of go do these, you know, this railing that goes down 3 flights of stairs and all that kind of stuff. So,
well, and also we could talk about this forever, but the other thing I will say as well is, to your point about skate parks, though, skate parks were still places that mostly skaters and people that wanted to date skaters went.
Yeah.
The cool thing about amusement parks and water parks and even action parks is like, really, it did bring together all kinds, right? Yeah. And that's the one thing I do observe about social media, at least, especially for young people today, is like, I don't really think it's helping as like a unifier. It feels like it's probably making them more like, you know, you remember in high school, there was all the different groups, right? And I feel like now that seems more teased out than ever. And I think that's the part that I think to me seems to be missing, is like, where do kids go to be forced to socially interact with kids that are different and kids that don't fit the label that they're a part of? Because I think those experiences are valuable. And I think water parks and amusement parks were places where that would happen. I remember that growing up. Like, you would go with your crew, but you would see some other crew there, and inevitably you would stop, you would talk, you maybe wouldn't spend the whole day together, right? But you're kind of like having that common experience in a way. And it feels like social media makes that more difficult.
Yeah, very true. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow feathers in arms, that is episode number 10. As we mentioned up top, if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, help us keep it going by supporting us over at patreon.com/Pandora's Quack. Feel free to share, rate, and review us on the free podcasting service of your choice, and stick around for Pandora's Quack's other upcoming shows. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, listeners. Nicole, we've seen people retroactively canceled, for things that they've said or done 5, 10, 15 years into the past. So is it really so hard to believe that we'd soon start canceling people based on things they haven't even done yet?
Oh, can't wait to see where we're going with that one.
This podcast was produced by Pandora's Quack. She's Nicole Matthews, and you can follow her where?
You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Matthews and on Instagram at Marie Coley.
And I'm Brandan Jones, and you can follow me on Twitter or Vero at Lamar Diablo. That's one word. And these are the rabbit holes that quack. Good night.